All right, folks. We are good morning. First of all, Freedom Fighter Radio breakfast, Cafe Freedom. Here, your host, Ordinary Joe, coming to you live, coast to coast to coast, all across United States and Canada and the rest of the world, folks. The finale last night, the RNC, the Republican National Convention, is very inspiring, very heartwarming. And I couldn't stay the whole time. It was long, but it was exciting. The atmosphere is vibrant. The atmosphere was exhilarating. I had a lot of things I'm doing at the same time simultaneously. So I'm just going to give you some highlights that I like about the RNC. There was Kid Rock. There was Hulk Hogan also appeared. Dana White flew just for the speech, flew into the United States. He was on vacation, and he's never been on a vacation for the last 10 years. So the president said, give him a break, let him have a vacation. But then he decided that he will come in just for the speech, just for his giving honor to now the official nominee of the Republican Party, Donald Trump. And this particular day, the RNC was opened by Tucker Carlson. He gave a very important, very insightful speech. I think this is the only speech that because it's not too long. This is the only speech that we're gonna play from end to end, and some of the speech we're just gonna highlight, and I'm gonna share my thoughts with you about the entire thing. And thank you for joining me this morning, the day after the RNC finale, the Republican National Convention finale from Milwaukee. I'm broadcasting live from Midtown, Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Our Freedom Fighter radio broadcast is not specific to the United States or specific to Canada, but regionally we are covering the um, the, the freedom movement within the United States, Canada, the Five Eyes Alliance, and the rest of the world. So let's start with Tucker Carlson, and I'm going to give my thoughts in this speech, which I'll give you a little bit of synopsis. What you're going to be hearing, you're going to be hearing how he thinks that uh, President Trump became the leader of the nation even before he becomes the nominee, or even before 4 months before the general election in the United States, and some of the principles that I think Tucker Carlson is coming around, becoming more familiar with the move of the spirit and the coming to the right side of the spiritual war that's going on in our society. So I'm gonna shut up now and let's listen to Tucker, and then we'll continue on with with some of the highlights of the RNC, most particularly the finale speech that President Trump has given. Definitely, there's something changed with Donald Trump, but the the sense of humor, the confidence, the energy is still there, even after the attempt on his life. Definitely still there, and it is super fun to watch. And so let's get going with the coverage, or our thoughts on some of the highlights of last night's finale of the RNC convention that happened in Milwaukee. Here we go.
American citizen, Tucker Carlson.
So fun! Thank you! Oh, this is wild. Thank you! I've been... Good to see you! Thank you. I feel like I know about half the people in the room. This is wild. What are you doing? Justin Wells. Thank you, guys. Can I just say, Peter Navarro is back. Welcome to Peter Navarro. Suffering the fate that has happened to so many who are friends with Donald Trump. Thank you for having me. I have been to many conventions. I have never been to a more fun convention or a convention with better vibes. They literally let Navarro out of prison. First of all, thank you. This feels a lot different from what I thought it was going to feel like. I can't hear you, but I know it's something good. So, I watched the video of what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania about 50 times. I think I was one of about 8 billion people around the world who watched it. And the more I watched it, the more it struck me that everything was different after that moment. Everything. This convention is different. The nation is different. The world is different. Donald Trump is different. When he stood up after being shot in the face, bloodied, and put his hand up, I thought at that moment, that was a transformation. This was no longer a man. Well, I think that. I think it was divine intervention. But the effect that it had on Donald Trump, he was no longer just a political party's nominee, or a former president, or a future president. This was the leader of a nation. And I think there's a difference. I've spent most of my life in Washington, where the president is at the top of the pyramid. Everyone wants to be the president. But if you think about it, the presidency comes with great power, obviously. But if you think about it, that is a title that is bestowed by a process of some sort that can be subverted. And in the end, it does not confer by itself, as no title does, legitimacy. Just because you call yourself the president doesn't mean that much inherently. I can call my dog the CEO of Hewlett-Packard. It doesn't mean she is. It's true. And you hate to say it, but it is also true, as a fact, that you could take, I don't know, a mannequin, a dead person, and make him president. No, you could. I'm just saying theoretically possible. With enough cheating, that could happen. But being a leader is very different. It's not a title. It's organic. You can't name someone a leader. A leader is the bravest man. That's who the leader is. That is true in all human organizations. This is a law of nature. And in that moment, Donald Trump, months before the presidential election, became the leader of this nation. That was the most obvious to me. And I have to say, I think it changed him. I reached out to Trump within hours of it that night. And what he said to me that night, having just been shot in the face, he said not a single word about himself. He said only how amazed he was and how proud he was of the crowd, which didn't run. And I thought two things. The first thing I thought was, well, of course they didn't run. His courage gave them heart. A leader's courage gives courage to his people. And the second thing I thought was, this is the selfish guy I've been hearing about for 9 years, really? Not a word about himself? About his people, period. And the second thing I noticed, which I don't think anyone has remarked upon in public, but I'm just going to since I don't have a script, like why not, is that he turned down the most obvious opportunity in politics to inflame the nation after being shot. To inflame the nation, which is an opportunity that almost every other politician I've ever met, and certainly his opponents, would have taken instantly. And they would have said, well, what is this? How did he get shot? Like, how did this happen? And those are real questions that we have to get to the bottom of. But in the moments, the days, the week after the shooting, he did not say that. He did his best to bring the country together, and I thought, this is the divisive figure, this is the irresponsible person. No. This is the most responsible, unifying behavior of a leader I think I've ever seen. So the question is, where is he leading us? And I could go on for hours, but let me just sum it up. I do think the entire point from the famous escalator ride 9 years ago until today of Donald Trump's public life has been to remind us of one fact, which is a leader's duty is to his people, to his country, and to no other. That's the point. That's the only point. And another word for this is democracy. Democracy, in case you're a little sick of being beaten in the face with democracy on television, actual democracy is the proposition that the citizens of a country own that country. They're not renters, they're not serfs, they're not slaves, they are the owners of the country. And for that to be true, their leaders have to represent them, which is another way of saying they have to do what the people want them to do, or a close approximation thereof. But if they completely ignore what people want, not just 1 year, but generationally, say for 50 years, then it may be, I don't know what, it's not a democracy. And so I think the entire Trump project, paradoxically, is attacked as an enemy of democracy, is to return democracy to the United States. Hey, let's pay attention to what people actually want. And the lack of interest in that question in Washington is something that ultimately drove me out of the city after 35 years. Lawmakers stepping over the prostrate bodies of their fellow citizens ODing on drugs to go cast votes to send money to some foreign country. Yeah, actually, we've lost more Americans from drugs in the past 4 years than we lost in World War II. Yeah, our bloodiest war. More than we lost in World War II. Does anybody care? It is pathetic. It is pathetic. And do you hear a single word from Washington about doing anything about it? We know where the drugs are coming from. We know the supply routes. The U.S. military spent billions bombing the Ho Chi Minh Trail. You don't see our commander-in-chief suggesting that we use our military to protect our country or the lives of its citizens. No. That's for Ukraine. And it's too much, actually. It's too insulting. It's too insulting. It's a middle finger in the face of every American. It's a very clear statement, which is unmistakable. And that is, we don't care about you. And Donald Trump, whatever you say about him, and I think he's a wonderful person. I know him well. By the way, the funniest person I've ever met in my life, actually. You can't be funny without perspective or without empathy, which is true. But everything else about Trump aside, he actually cares because he's interested in the people who live here because that's his job. A father's job, his duty is to his family. An officer's duty is to his men. A president's duty is to his citizens. And he seems to be the only one who thinks that. And in his choice for vice president, J.D. Vance, he's made that really clear. J.D. Vance, I'll say this about him, is a thoroughly decent man, and I'll just admit it, a friend of mine, one of the very few politicians in Washington who actually is very close to his own wife, which is wonderful to see. And she's wonderful, actually. But J.D. Vance has views that are closer to Trump's voters than anyone else in Washington in office. Therefore, he's the vice president. That's called democracy. So I will stop on just one point, and that's what's happened over the past month since the debate, and particularly on Saturday in Butler. I think a lot of people are wondering, what is this? This doesn't look like politics. Something bigger is going on here. I think even people who don't believe in God are beginning to think, well, maybe there's something to this, actually. And I'm starting to think it's going to be okay, actually. I do think that. In the day after the midterm elections in 2018, Antifa came to my house. The Democratic Party's militia, okay? I was at work. It was obvious when I was at work because it was public. My wife was home alone. They tried to come in through the front door. They terrorized her. She hid in our pantry. It was on television. It was horrible, actually. It was, I mean, I'm not whining about it. I wasn't getting shot in the face, but it wrecked our day. And the next morning, we're lying in bed, and the phone rings for my wife, and it's Donald Trump, who's not like a regular text buddy of Donald Trump's. She picks it up, hello? Susie, it's Donald Trump. And it's coming through, I could hear it. You know, I'm lying in bed, whoa. And the first thing he says is, I'm gonna stand guard outside your house. And she goes, oh, it's just so nice. And he says, I'll never forget this as long as I live. He says, there's a lot of hate out there. And she said, there is, Mr. President. And then he says, but there's a lot of love. There's a lot of love. And we are seeing that love. I don't think it's human love. And I'll just stop with this. I'm not always convinced that I'm on the right side. I've been on the wrong side many times. You'll never hear me say, I'm on God's side, or God's with me, or even I'm with God. I want to be, not sure I am. But I will say this unequivocally and conclusively. God is among us right now. And I think that's enough. God bless you.
I'm gonna play some of the music at the end. Actually, let me show you how the entire night has ended. It was a lot of energy. It was really inspiring, and I thought, anybody on his right. When it so on time there. Um, Anybody on his right mind really would have that, most likely have that desire to be in such an exciting place. Kind of empty, but I'm not there. I think a lot of you who were watching on their television, screen, whatever channel they're using. Anyways, on the screen right there on the right account, the I I discovered her for the first time today when she gave a speech. That's one of Donald Trump's granddaughter, Trump. I think is one of the prettiest Trump. Um, some of